Hi, I'm Ven. Welcome to my book corner. This is my reading wrap up for May of 2026, and we're a little bit back to normal this month after a couple of pretty poor reading months, at least in terms of the amount I've been reading or listening to. So today we have 11 books to get through. We're going to go through them one by one, and then I'm going to look at my overall stats for the month and where I'm up to year to date. So let's dive straight into the first book of this month. First up then, and in the title of Why Do I Keep Doing This to Myself, I continued with the ACOFAS series, and this one was A Court of Frost and Starlight. Possibly my favourite of the covers of the books. I had hopes for this. I despised book 1 and book 3 in the series, but this was the worst reviewed ACOFAS book, and as I have generally been at odds with the opinion of the fanbase, I thought I'd like this more. I can remember nothing about it. Nothing of any real note happens in this. There's little bits of moments. I will say one thing that this does kind of work for me in one way is that it actually makes Tamlin interesting, kind of, even though he's barely in the book. But there's something there that could hint at an interesting story to tell. But past that, I actually don't like the Feyre Rysand relationship at all. I don't feel like there's any real chemistry there. Everything that was built up in book 2 of the series fell apart in book 3 for me, and it continues to just feel vapid at best here. There are a couple of nice character moments around Elaine and Nesta, I forgot her name then, and a couple of little bits for Cassian in particular as well. But nothing groundbreaking. I gave this a 3 stars. I will say Amanda Lee Cobb did a good job with the narration. I've enjoyed the narration before over on the Chronicles of Nixia series, what I've listened to so far. And they did a solid job here, but this was just... Genuinely, this was felt like a pointless entry in many ways to me. Hopefully, this will be my last engagement with the series until Elaine from Cobalt Dragon bullies me into reading book 5. Up next, we have another audiobook, and this is Grace by A.M. Shine, and this was narrated by Deirdre O'Connell. And this was really, really, really good. I love A.M. Shine's work. You can really feel the love for Irish mythology and folklore that comes through his books, and this is another shining example of that. This is set on a small, sparsely populated island that sits somewhere off the west coast of mainland Ireland. And it's a little island that has a bit of a dark history. A lot of tales and rumours surround this sort of semi-abandoned spit of land. There's no children there. The people who live there have pretty much never really left for any reason, and people don't want to go there. Our main character, Grace, however, well, she receives a phone call from the priest that is serving on the island to let her know that her biological mother has passed away. Grace themselves was fostered at a relatively young age. But stuff has been left to Grace in the will and invites them to come to the island. And things very, very quickly begin to go from bad to worse, especially after Grace arrives there. I love the care for Irish myth that goes into this one. I think Deirdre O'Connell as well had the perfect level of Irish lilt to their voice and their narration to really, really sell the various different things that were going on. I enjoyed this a lot. I might actually up the score to 4.5 stars, actually. I think this was a really, really good folk horror book. I do have a full review up for this one. I will link that up above if you want to check that out. At the moment, it's sitting at a 4.25, but I might up it to 4.5 stars. That's Grace by A.M. Shine. Shine is very much one of my must-buy authors at this point. Up next, we have an indie short story collection, and I was lucky enough to take part in the cover reveal for this one. Massive thank you to Chris over at Fictional Escapist for providing an arc for this one for me and helping me take part in that. If you haven't checked out their channel already, absolutely do so. Well, this is Together is a Distant Star. So this is an anthology of sci-fi and fantasy stories with a central theme of belonging, being that seeking belonging, wanting belonging, or finding somewhere to belong and what that looks like. And it's always really interesting with short story collections like this, where you have what's quite a vague sort of throughput throughout all the stories to see how these various different authors interpret belonging and what that looks like, especially in the different stories that they do. And this is a really, really, really strong sci-fi and fantasy collection. This was a lot of fun to read. As always with short stories, especially when it's multiple authors and different genres as well, your mileage is going to vary a little bit depending on your personal preferences. Well, I think this is a really, really strong short story collection. I think there's something for everyone in here if you're a fan of sci-fi or fantasy. I gave this 4 stars overall. And again, that's just because some stories worked better for me than others, but I don't think there's a bad story in here. And the quality of writing is, unsurprisingly, as it often is with indie books, is absolutely superb. I hope this gets a load of love and attention. I gave this 4 stars. That's Together is a Distant Star. Marching in next, we have The Skin Parade by Schumacher. This is a indie novella coming in at 86 pages. I got this via Book Sirens. This did release back in April. And this is a bit of a frustrating one because I want to like this more than I do. And there's one simple reason why I don't, which I'll get onto in a minute. But the idea for this is we have a private investigator who's been hired by their ex to look for their new partner. They go to this town, which feels a little bit frozen in time, a little bit in the Hicks, so to speak. And as they begin to ask questions, there's kind of a sense of hostility towards him and outsiders in general. Outsiders are not welcome in this place. There's also a level of fear running through the residents as well, and almost like a cult-like feeling in the air. All that is really good, and I also like the way that this is written. The visceral moments are really, really well done and gruesome. The dialogue is pretty good overall. And also, on top of that, this is written almost like a backward-facing narrative, so it kind of feels like we're reading the journal of our main character after the events of the story. Love all that. There's 2 problems here. The first one is the character is pretty dislikable, our main character, which is fine. You can do books like that, but you need to be able to bank on something. And unfortunately, at 86 pages, this doesn't save enough tension to cash out at the end. Added to the fact that as a private detective, there's a decision that they make very early on, which is boneheadedly stupid, objectively so. And that kind of pulls away from the repercussions that happen because it doesn't have that underlying tension there. And I think that's the problem with this. I love the idea of this as you begin to get the sense of wrongness in the story and of this location, but it needs to be a slower build over a longer book for it to actually capitalize on its sort of themes and its settings and all the stuff it's got going on. It's decently written, but it just feels like it should have been longer, and it could have been longer just to really capitalize on what it was trying to do. I gave it 3 stars. Genuinely, if this was a slower story and at 150 pages, it could have been a 4.5, but at 86 pages, it lacked any sort of kick for me. So there we go. That's The Skin Parade by Schumacher. I needed a little bit of a more light-hearted read, so I went back to the Discworld series by Prattchett. This is book 18 in the series, Maskarade. This is another one of the Witches books, very much inspired by the opera, more specifically Phantom of the Opera, but opera in general and stage production as well. And like all Discworld books, this is just phenomenally insightful, looking at some of the absurdity of some of the stuff that you have on stage sometimes, the superstitions that sort of pervade the backstage areas. The double dealing that can go on as well. The idea of business people being involved in the arts because they think it's profitable and then ruining the arts. That feels a little bit on the nose nowadays, if you really stop and think about it. But also Granny Weatherwax's continued development. She's been out and seen the world. And as this local witch, kind of is bored back home in a cottage and just sending their mind out to ride the animals. So when they're given an excuse to go to Ankh-Morpork to settle some scores, shall we say, in terms of her friend's cookbook and the fact that she hasn't been receiving royalties from it, and everyone thinks that Granny wrote it as well. So there's that side of it. But also Agnes Nitt is in Ankh-Morpork. We met her in the previous book. She has the potential to be a witch. At the moment, there's only 2 witches in the Coven, and 2 witches are an argument. You need one to help the others make up. Absolutely love this. The idea as well of how performance is moving towards people who look a certain way rather than having true talent. That's an interesting take as well. But there's a couple of lines in this that really stick with me, but one in particular near the end, where Agnes turns around to Granny because she's not been invited so much to come back to Lancre where they live and to become a witch, but it's certainly insinuated. And she snaps at Granny that, oh, I suppose you're going to teach me. And Granny just looks at her and goes, teach? No, I don't have the patience to teach, but I might let you learn. That line is chef's kiss for me personally. I absolutely love the Witches books. Granny is one of my favourite characters in fiction, arguably my favourite, although I will add Sam Vimes does push her on that one a little bit, but they're very similar characters in a lot of ways. This is my 5-star read for the month. What can I say? I'm looking forward to moving on to Carpe Jugulum this month at some point. Up next, we have The Summer Hikaru Died Volume 4. So this is a manga series that I've been enjoying quite a bit. Now, number 3 felt a little bit flat. It was okay, but it felt a bit like a placeholder in a lot of ways. This felt a bit more like the first couple of books. The artwork, once again, is absolutely phenomenal. We're beginning to get a slow peeling back of the mysteries surrounding Hikaru and the various things to do with the town and the hills where Hikaru died, inverted commas. Also is being a little bit more overt with its LGBTQ plus themes in here as well, which I also really like. And I like the fact we're beginning to peel back the skin of the mystery here. Does feel like a bit of a return to form after the last one. I did give this a 4.25 stars out of 5. Not really going to talk too much about this one. I think this is a really, really good manga series, certainly so far. So if you're a fan of manga and horror, I do recommend you check this one out. But that's Volume 4 of The Summer Hikaru Died, and I gave that 4.25 stars. Next up, we're returning to one of my favourite indie authors, Rex Burke, with their latest offering, Hide and Seek, Book 2 in the Star Runners series. This is a follow-up to Special Delivery, which is one of my favourite reads of last year. This came out at the back end of April, 248 pages for the digital version. And this is just fun. Rex's books are always so much fun. It picks up from the end of the previous one, where our ragtag group are kind of on this rural planet backwater, kind of trying to stay hidden and keep the kid that they saved hidden as well. But they're ex-smugglers, ex-military, ex-trackers, and they're kind of bored on this quiet backwater planet, trying to escape notice, but things begin to happen. People are still looking for them, and eventually their hand is kind of forced. What works so well in here is the chemistry between the characters. Rex does an amazing job with the character writing in terms of their interactions in all his books, and it really comes through here. Dix and Vasquez in particular are just an absolute riot when they're on the page. And there's some new characters introduced here as well who I really, really like. One in particular I would love to see come back in another book later on. Gave this 4.25 stars out of 5. It doesn't feel like it's got as much punch as book 1 does. It doesn't feel quite as high stakes, but sometimes you get that. Also, it's worth mentioning that the ending of this is a really, really smart swerve, which I appreciated. I was kind of bummed at how I thought it was going to go, and then there's a twist at the end, which was kind of hinted at, but not really. And I really, really like that ending. I cannot wait for the next book in the Star Runners series. Hide and Seek by Rex Burke. 4.25 stars out of 5. This next one has taken me forever to read. I started this on the 5th of March, and I only finished it last month. And I'm going to go a little bit into the reasons why for that in a moment. I did receive an art copy of this one as well, worth mentioning that here. This is Revenge of the Wraith Paladin by Paul G. Zareith, and this is a grim, dark fantasy / sci-fi. There's a lot going on with this book. There's a lot of interesting world building in here. The world itself is actually really, really interesting, and there's a lot of fascinating elements to this. The emphasis, however, there is on the word "a lot," because there's a lot going on with this book, and whilst it is 650 plus pages long, for me personally, no individual aspect of this book got the focus or the depth that I felt it needed, so it ended up feeling like it was spread too thin. You have time-traveling vampires, you have the avatar of a dead god, you have blood magic, you have rune magic, you have space empires, you have magical reincarnation, you have leviathans and kaiju monsters. There's a lot in this book, and every element of it is really, really interesting, but it all feels too thinly spread, which is a shame because the writing's pretty good overall. The dialogue sometimes feels a bit stilted, but that's fine. The characters aren't especially likable, but again, it's a grimdark setting. I don't expect likable characters, but there's just so much going on here, and it's sort of compounded for me by how short the chapters are. Because a lot of the chapters are 1 to 2 minute reads, and if you're the sort of reader that I am, where it's all about the flow of the reading, chapter breaks break the flow. So it felt very stop and start, like a stalling engine, and then I'm not getting enough time for those scenes to breathe. And sometimes it didn't feel like it had to be a chapter break. It could have been the same chapter, and the following chapter could have just been one chapter, if that makes sense. And it was frustrating because I want to like this book. There's a lot here that is fascinating. The ending was interesting. It does do a solid job of pulling it together, although this is book 1 of a series. But there's just so much going on with this that it didn't feel like it had the depth that I wanted, which is a shame because I wanted to like this a lot more than I did. I gave this 3 stars out of 5. If you like grimdark, you may well like this. It just wasn't for me. The next 2 are going to go together because they're in the same series. I continued with the Spellslinger series by Sebastien de Castell. Book 5 was Queenslayer, coming in at 13 hours 4 minutes. Once again, this was narrated by Joe Jameson, who has really grown into the role over the course of the books. The starting of this really does a job of highlighting just how gormless Kellen is sometimes, although you sometimes forget that he's only 18 years old thereabouts. Or he turns 18 in this book, actually, as he finishes fighting a duel and then decides, or accidentally I should say, smears blood on the Darriman flag, an act of treason for which you get executed. Gets taken to the Queen, who is 11 or 12 years old, and ends up being given clemency and made the tutor of cards, giving them kind of like diplomatic immunity in many ways. It's a lot of fun. You've got a little bit of political intrigue here. You've got a little bit of sort of folklore around the Queen and the fact that she's a child queen, but as the soul of every queen that's ever lived and sat on that throne, so to speak, or every monarch, I should say. So like an immortal soul. You have more of the political wrangling sort of from a continental scale as well here, which is interestingly done. this is probably my least favourite of the book so far. It's still good. It's still well narrated. But Kellen, a lot of the times in this, comes off just as a bit of a prick. A lot of the time, to be honest. I do like the fact that he kind of is acknowledging that he's very much owning that persona in a lot of ways. It's decent enough. I kind of like the ending. I like the way that he starts to play people off against each other. I continue to enjoy as well his relationship with Rikus. So that's all pretty well done. But not my favourite in the series. And then we move on to Crownbreaker, which is book 6, coming in at 14 hours, 21 minutes. Pretty much taking place straight after the ending, more or less, of book 5. I enjoyed this a fair bit more. In this situation, all the political wranglings that have been going on throughout the course of the book so far, it's very much been hinted that there's somebody sort of pulling the strings, pushing people to war. And it very much comes to a head and becomes clear who that is here. And it works really well. And the idea of Kellen being the only person who can go and do what needs to be done, which is basically to go and kill a god, allegedly, because he's not powerful enough to be noticed, but he's smart enough to get the job done. And Kellen's own kind of moral quandary with this, despite the fact that this might be what's needed to save the continent. It's really interesting done. You also have the battling loyalties that he has, not just to his own conscience, but to the Darrenman Queen, to his family, and to his friends as well. A number of the people that we've met over the course of the series make cameo appearances in here, which is well done. It's great to have Ferius back as well. I will say I was a little bit disappointed with the reveal of who was pulling the strings. It felt a bit predictable, whereas I would have liked something maybe a little bit more outside the box. But overall, I think this is pretty well done. I like the ending for this as well. I think the ending is really, really smart in the way it plays into those themes of family loyalty that we've seen sort of run throughout this. And this does have a sense of weight to it that a lot of the other books lacked. Again, Joe Jameson was narrating, does an amazing job with this. I think this is their best performance of the series by far. It's kind of a shame to get to the end of this series, not going to lie. I do know there is a kind of spin-off series as well, which I am going to check out at some point. I gave this a 4 stars out of 5. I think this is a very, very solid end to the series that I've enjoyed quite a bit. Last but not least, we have Straight Boy from J. Bell that came out in 2018. And it's a bit hard to talk about this without spoiling the second half of the book. What I will say is I've seen a lot of people criticise this in reviews because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And I can understand that, but I think that's kind of missing the point. We're following a character called Andrew. Andrew is openly gay and has recently moved to the city of Chicago. And after moving there, they meet a fellow student called Carter King, who's also recently moved to Chicago, and they hit it off straight away. And Andrew is head over heels for Carter, but there's certainly some mixed signals coming back about whether Carter is interested in Andrew in that way or just as friends. But there is undeniable chemistry between the two. And this very much looks at the navigation of that sort of relationship as a gay person having feelings for somebody else but not sure if they're inclined in the same way as you are, or if they're even sure where they sit on that spectrum, so to speak. But it also looks at some darker themes as well in the wider friend group, feelings of guilt as well as violence, homophobia and power dynamics all show up in this book, and I think are really well actualized as well. I also like the ending of this, the fast forward to 10 years in the future to look at where the characters that we spend time with throughout the majority of the book, how they end up, and looking at how friendships change over that period of time, especially school friendships, which at the time we all think they're going to last forever and they'll never break. And actually looking at this entire friend group and how there's that natural drift, and it's something really natural about the way that last sort of epilogue plays out. I really liked this. It actually made me quite emotional at a couple of points, which is unusual for a book for me. But yeah, I really liked this one. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. I'm probably going to check out some more of J Bell's stuff at some point as well. I feel like it's slightly underscored just because a few people thought they were getting one sort of book, and that's not what they got. So there we go. So that's the 11th book for me. For May. So then, in terms of reading stats, 11 books total, 2,042 pages and 44.6 hours. Much more normal than the last few months. In terms of reading mood, adventurous and dark, as normal, are at the top. But we do have funny and hopeful on there, which doesn't happen very often, and light-hearted. Very unusual to see that in my rotation. 5 medium-paced books, 1 slow, 2 fast, and a couple of them bizarrely do not fit on any of those, but there we go. 4 books under 300, 1 over 500, 2 between 300 and 500. 1 ebook under 8 hours, which was the Akatar book, and 3 between 8 and 16. And in terms of genres, 6 fantasy, as always, at the top. We had a little bit of LGBTQIA plus as well this month. 3 YA, 3 horror, a short story, and 2 sci-fi, 1 romance, 1 mystery, 1 manga. 45% digital, 4 audio, 2 print. I think you can add 1 more to digital there because it's automatically set to print, but there we go. And an average rating of 3.86. And in terms of my reading, a little bit all over the place, to be honest, but that's fine. We can cope with that. It's much better than previous months have been. In terms of my yearly targets, then we're looking a little bit more healthy than we did last month. I did, as mentioned previously, reduce my pages target for the year from 16,500 to 15,750. I did slightly increase my hours target, though, from 200 to 225. So you have a bit of a switch over there because I'm listening to a few more audiobooks at the moment. However, we are currently at 34 books out of 60 for the year, so that's ahead by 9. We're on 7,222 pages so far, which is 663 ahead. And in terms of hours, we're just over 102 hours, which is about 8.5 hours over where I should be at this point. So that's all looking pretty good now. In terms of my reads for this month, I am currently reading Rising Gale by Z.B. Steele. This is book 2 in Song of the Damned and the follow-up to my 5-star read from last year, Whispers of the Storm. Enjoying it so far, only 10% of the way through, but so far, so good. I do have another couple of arcs, hopefully this month as well. But past that, I'm actually not sure what I'm going to read this month. So, is there any books you'd like me to read? If so, let me know in the comments down below. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing reading month in June. I'll catch you all very soon.